Hello everyone, this is Prem Kumar. In this video, we are going to talk about 6 common decisions which you get during the Pega development. This can also be like a normal interview questions when you appear for some interviews. Let's get started with the first question. So whenever you start creating a new application, the first question that comes to your mind is whether to go for the implementation application or the framework application. First, let's understand the pattern term of Pega, the situation layer cake. The situation layer cake helps in deciding at which layer your source code can go. As you know that on Pega application development, we build applications layer by layer so that we put all the reusable code into the bottom layer or the base layer, and then you can implement applications over the base layer so that you can reuse the rules that are part of the base layer. If I remember correctly, till 7.1 version, the mindset is always like you create a framework application, the FW layer, and then you put all your reusable code under the framework application, and finally you build only one implementation application over the framework layers. I can also say from my LSA experience from Pega 7.1, where I got an app fix feedback for this situation layer cake issue, where I created framework application, but Pega start recommending that you don't want to create framework application every time. You can create framework application only when the situation demands, otherwise you can just create implementation application. Also till 7.1, you cannot create implementation application over another implementation application. But in the later releases, you can always now build implementation application over the implementation application. And also with the introduction of component applications, now you can build a piece of code as component applications, and then you can build applications over those component applications. I would recommend you to visit the video where I explained about different application types, and there you will understand the framework application usage, the implementation application usage, and the component applications. Now let's move to the next point. App Studio versus Dev Studio. You see, Pega now invested a lot of things on the low-code platform. They call it as App Studio, which is intended for the citizen developers, and Dev Studio is primarily intended to do all the advanced development for the developers. But what I feel is, I already see Dev Studio is kind of a low-code platform, right? If you want to build some connect REST, service REST, or whatever integrations, all you need to do is just do the configurations. You don't want to build from scratch to build the Java classes to do the integration, but you just configure the rules, right? So I feel Dev Studio is already a low-code platform, and App Studio is kind of a more low-code platform for the business users. I also seen in projects where people are reluctant to use App Studio for any existing application. For greenfield applications, definitely you can try it out. You can start with the App Studio. The developers and the business architects, if they are really interested, they can start with the App Studio, build your case type and design everything. But at some moment, definitely you are going to switch to Dev Studio and do the application development in Dev Studio. You cannot build an entire application for an organization in the App Studio alone. I'm saying this point as of Pega 8.7 version and with my own experience. Maybe people will have different opinion on that. And also personally, my comfort zone is always on the Designer Studio. I can give a try on App Studio and explore different features. But if someone asks me to do some kind of development, I prefer Dev Studio over the App Studio. Okay, now we talked about applications. We talked about different studios. Whenever you start building the requirements into Pega case management, you will have some major decisions points in making a process as a case type or a sub process. You also need to make some decisions whether to go for child cases or independent cases. All these can be decided on based on certain criteria. First, let's talk about the parent-child. When you want to go for parent-child and when you want to go for independent cases. When there is a tight dependency between two cases, from the requirement itself you can easily identify that this case cannot be a standalone case. It cannot be an independent case. It should always come under another case. In that situation, you can define the case as a child case to any existing parent case. So when there is a case dependency, you can always go with parent-child. And if there is no case dependency, then you can always start creating it as an independent case type. By independent case type, you don't have any much dependency. It can be a standalone case type and it can also be imported and used in a different application stack. Okay, now let's also talk about when to go for a case type and when to use only subprocess and not go for a case type. There can be three main reasons. The first is the security. If you want to have some kind of dedicated security features for some processes, then you can create it as a case type and implement the security features for the case type. You can also implement some security features for the sub process or flow, but I prefer to do it per case type. The next is on the reporting. If you want to have number of processes that got created recently, and if you want to check a daily report or a monthly report, ideally you can create the process as a case type so that reporting can be easy. You can just create report definitions over the case class layer, and then you can create whatever reports you want. The third criteria can be the stakeholders involved. If you have different stakeholders involved for that specific process, you can also create it as a separate case type and involve the work parties for the case type. For our A-Life organization, we already created investigation as a child case. The first thing is child case because it is totally tied up with the claims records, and the second thing is I created it as a case type and not as a sub process because I have different stakeholders there and I have some different reporting requirement there, so that I created it as a case type instead of a sub process. So based on these criteria, you can do a brainstorm with your team, you can talk with your LSAs, and you can come to a conclusion that what can work best for you. Okay, now let's talk about the fourth point. When to create the abstract class and concrete class. Abstract and concrete are the two different class types which you can create in Pega, and most of your source code, the coding which you do, will go under the class layers. So Pega has these two different types of class. The main difference between these two types is concrete classes can have instances, whereas abstract classes, they cannot have instances. So claims records is a case type. A class layer is formed for the case type, and that class layer should be concrete because in claims request we are going to have a lot of work instances created per claims request. So mostly all your work class layer, it is going to be concrete so that those work can have the instances. So what can be the use case for abstract? The integration layers can be the best use cases for abstract. If you want to get the data or instances from a different system, normally you create the integration layer, you create your integration rules under the integration layer. And those integration layer, normally they won't have any instances because the instances are going to be outside of the application. All you have to do is do some mapping and get it into the Pega application. So ideally for all the integration classes, all you can do is just create abstract classes. Don't create the concrete classes for the integration layers. The third is on the data layer. So can we create an abstract class or concrete class for the data layer? That is decided based on the source of the data layer. Let's say the data layer is sourced from a Pega database. You have all the customer details into the Pega database into a dedicated table. Then you can create a class layer of data class that maps to the dedicated table so that that class layer can have instances and it can be a concrete class. In other situations, if the same customer data, if it stays in the other system, first you use the integration layer to get the data. Then you can use your abstract data layer to map the data into your application. So data layer, it can be abstract, it can be concrete, and that you can decide based on the source of data. So deciding between concrete and abstract, it is decided only based on if the class can have instances or not. The fifth point to discuss is about the activity and data transform. This can be the most common questions which you may get in any interviews. Why data transform is preferred over activity? Pega do say they have some performance issues with activity execution. If you just open any activity rule, go to view Java and check. For each and every method which you use in activity rule, it creates a method instance. So the Java class is going to be huge, and the code compilation is also going to give you some performance issues. So when to go for activity and when not to go for activity. If you have very simple property set, or if you have some kind of requirements which can be achieved with any other rule, then don't go for activity. For example, for any kind of data manipulation, you can go for data transform rule. You don't want to have an activity to do only the property set. You can do a lot of things in the data transform rule. Data transform rule can also call functions. So you can prefer data transform over activity when you have some kind of data manipulation work. Activities mostly it's like an automation steps which can be executed, and if you have some kind of declarative processing, then you have dedicated declarative rules to do the declarative processing. In that case, again, you don't want to have an activity. Instead, you can go for the declarative rules. Similarly, there are a lot of APIs or the engine APIs which you have to achieve a lot of requirements that comes out of the box. In that cases, you don't want to create and introduce a new activity. Instead, you can use the existing activity that is already shipped. So by these ways, you can reduce the usage of activity rules. But there are some places in the Pega development where you should be using the activity rules. For example, if you are creating any kind of service like service REST, you need to have a service activity. You cannot replace it with a data transform. And if you have some kind of OBJ methods, you cannot do it in a data transform or other role. Definitely you should go with an activity. So decide based on that. If you really want to go with the activity, then only you go for activity. Otherwise, prefer the other rules which can replace the same thing which an activity can do. The final decision point which I am going to talk is about integration. Let's say you are creating a new service. Which service type you will prefer? It's a web service. Usually you may go for REST or SOAP. I always prefer go with REST service. I also see in different projects where they always use REST service. They never go for SOAP service unless there is some organization standard requirement that you should use only the SOAP web service. Otherwise, we always go for REST service. So let's now talk about some of the differences. First thing is SOAP is a standard protocol where REST is not a protocol. It's like an architectural style which follows some standards. When you look at the messaging, SOAP do support only the XML message formats. But REST service, it not only supports the XML format, but it also supports the most preferred REST service format, the JSON format. XML format is always considered heavy comparing to JSON format, and so people call REST service is more lightweight than the SOAP service. When you want to expose this web service to the outside world, REST service can be exposed via just the URI, where for SOAP service you have to expose the service interfaces. When SOAP service works with the HTTP transport layer, it do support only the post method, whereas REST service, it supports different HTTP methods. You can use get, put, post, delete, and also patch. So is there only disadvantages of using SOAP over REST? No. SOAP also they have their own advantages. The first main advantage is on security. SOAP can be secured using WS security. That is a standard security and it stands little bit over the REST service security. SOAP can also support different protocols like HTTP protocol or SMTP protocol, whereas REST it supports only the HTTP protocol. With SOAP, you also get some inbuilt error handling. If you look at the SOAP response and when there is some error, you will have some kind of SOAP fault XML tags within the response. But in JSON, you have to build your own error handling. So these can be the main differences between SOAP and REST, but you can decide on your own. Mostly you can prefer going for REST service, which is lightweight, which is performance wise better than the SOAP service. So these are the 6 decision points which I want to discuss in this video. See you in the next video.